Hello, my name is Dawn Gardner, and I'm excited to share with you my presentation on transformations in e-learning, an overview of blended learning. Today's society has seen an influx of technology in everyday practices, including the classroom. More educators are seeing that lessons must be very engaging and rigorous in order to meet the diverse learning needs of today's student. No longer are children expected to just sit and get. With the challenge of preparing students' careers, we must take a different approach that is more authentic for students to gain knowledge through use of authentic experiences that help build lifelong learning skills. The definition of blended learning is any formal education program in which a student learns at least part through which some of it takes part in online learning with some element of student control over time, place, path, or pace. Most blended learning program formats include flipped learning, station rotation, flex model, and the lab rotation. With the growth of blended learning, more school districts are looking to see if implementing actually leads to student achievement. In the 21st century classroom, blended learning can be implemented in all the content areas and enhance research and information fluency, communication and collaboration, creativity and innovation, and critical thinking and problem-solving skills. With the 21st century teaching practices, the students will work to develop purposeful questioning and authentic problem-solving skills. With there sometimes being confusion between what's blended learning, what it is, and what it isn't, more information is needed to ensure the instructional delivery model allows for meaningful academic growth. With any blended learning initiative, time, place, path, pace will be very important. You may see a mixture of traditional classroom methods mixed with the online component. Again, the shift to a student-centered learning environment is how we plan to build students' 21st century skills, which includes fostering communication and collaboration skills, growing critical thinking and problem-solving skills, and encouraging creativity among all subject areas. Blended learning will allow teachers and students to make their time together more productively. The issuing of one-to-one devices for all 3rd through 12th grade students allows students, regardless of background or zip code, to have access to their devices 24/7. This gives the teachers more choices in how they will deliver their instructional content, and the student now has a variety of different ways to demonstrate their learning.
Station rotation model, as we've said, students are rotating between different stations. So here what we see is that some students might start with teacher-led instruction, then they move to collaborative activities and stations, basically projects with other students, and then they move once again to that time when they're actually working on the computers and online learning. So in this graphic before you, what you see on the left-hand side is that students, represented by the blue dots, are actually in the classroom with their fellow peers. And you see that teacher at the front of the room in the red, and they're working on practice and projects. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, that represents students at home, and that's where they're doing their online learning. So in this picture of a flex school, we're just showing a generic flex model because lots of flex schools are doing very different setups within their actual physical space. In this particular model, what you see is that there's a central learning space where students have their individual offices, and you can see that each student has their computer, which is where they learn online. Now, around the perimeter of this central space are where there's lots of breakout rooms. You see the breakout rooms where students can work in small groups. You see a breakout room where students can go for their science instruction and actually do their lab work. You see a social area down at the bottom, and this is where students can jump in, sort of like a cafe, and actually learn with other peers when it suits their purpose. And the big idea, right, is that students are moving flexibly through these different modalities based on what they need when they need it. This is a generic picture of a lab rotation model. Lab rotations are taking lots of different forms, but the basic idea is similar across all of them. You can see in these 3 images over here on the left and top that students are in traditional classrooms with other students represented by those blue dots, with teachers in the red who are just leading them through very traditional instruction. And then students rotate out at very specific times to that bottom right-hand square, which is the learning lab. And that's where they're working online individually at computers.
Babler and Drizzen asked the question, could one trade contact hours for an active learning instruction and environment and achieve the same student experience and learning outcomes that a traditional learning environment can experience? Their study examined the benefits of blended learning and compared them to actual hours that students spend in classrooms. They found that this form of blended learning could actually reduce the total amount of study time students spent in the classrooms by 2/3 while lectures were moved online. The reduced classroom time was spent where students worked with each other to solve problem sets, answer clicker questions, listen to explanations of key concepts, and watch short demonstrations. Based on the research of the students achieved learning outcomes that were more beneficial and used than the outcomes from the traditional classroom. When measured by a standardized exam, the scores were about the same to each group. It seemed their perceptions of the learning environment were improved. This study also found that the student learning outcomes were comparable or better than the traditional style classroom environment. Blended learning is sometimes called hybrid learning, and it's been gaining steam around the country since the early 1990s as mobile devices have become more personal, portable, and affordable. The Christensen Institute's Michael B. Horn stated that many school districts are using blended learning to help rethink the school experience for its students. Kearns highlights that in the new blueprints for K-12 schools, Innovations Design, it supports a blended learning environment. More hard data on blended learning's prevalence and effectiveness is needed for most part, but for a large majority of school districts that have adopted blended learning, it seems to be working. When thinking about implementing a blended learning environment, we must make the shift from a teacher-centered classroom to a learner-centered one. An explanation of the teacher-centered versus learner-centered classroom is on the screen. With the need to shift instruction from traditional practices to more effective 21st century learning approach, blended learning will help transform the K-12 classroom while preparing students for careers in tomorrow's workforce. With teacher-centered, the focus is on the instructor. They talk a lot, the students listen and take appropriate notes. Students seem to work alone. Teachers also monitor and correct student responses, and the teacher answers students' questions for the most part while evaluating their student learning. In a learner-centered classroom, the focus is on the students and the teacher. Teacher models interact with students, students interact with teacher and each other. Students work in pairs, groups, or alone, depending on the purpose of the activity. Teachers provide feedback and correction when questions are asked of them. For the most part, though, they seem to be interacting with students. Students answer each other's questions, using the teacher as a resource for information, and they are in charge of evaluating their own learning. With the history and evolution of blended learning, it began in the 1840s with Sir Isaac Pitman, who conducted the first distant learning class. Though there were other variations on the concept prior to Pitman's, his was to resemble distance learning as we know it today. His course centered on shorthand. Pitman sent shorthand texts to his students via mailed postcards, and they were required to send them back to be graded and corrected. Even though computers and mobile devices weren't involved and wouldn't even be invented for roughly a century later, effective feedback and assessments were still an integral part of his learning process. In the progressive education movement with John Dewey in 1897, he highlighted that people began to see the way we educate our students needed to change. John Dewey stated that if education fails because it neglects the fundamental principle of the school as a form of community life. Dewey went on to argue that if schools shouldn't be a place where information is given to students, rather it should be a place where knowledge is constructed through experiences. As we continue with the historical implications, in 1892, the University of Wisconsin at Madison first used the actual term distance education in a pamphlet that was advertised to its students. This began the distance learning educational journey with universities in order to give students different learning opportunities in their education. From 1910 to 1920, radio distance learning courses all seemed to fail. Once the courses began to move towards using computers, there was more success. In 1948, some universities began using TV in distance learning courses to deliver content to students. This format began to reach momentum, and more schools and organizations began to use even other methods to give students more interactive choices in their learning. Some of these choices were CD-ROMs. With the evolution of technology, the blended learning strategies began to take more shape in e-learning. Schools and organizations began using CD-ROMs to deliver more interactive learning experiences, such as those that features video and sound. This delivery format could hold larger quantities of information, which made them ideally suited for distance learning. For the first time in e-learning history, computer-based courses were now able to offer a rich and comprehensive learning experience. In some cases, even took the place of face-to-face instruction. Organizations wanted to be able to track learner progress and improve online training courses, and these systems help to monitor e-learning course completion, enrollment data, and user performance within the CD-ROM platform. Did you know that one of the first noted success stories with a distance learning course was actually with ice cream? In 1977, Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield learned how to make ice cream through a distance learning correspondence course. A year later, Ben and Jerry's was formed and they opened their first store in Burlington, Vermont. Who knew that a blended learning format was one of the key factors to a great American invention? One of the first true generation of web-based instruction was noted in 1998. With more computers being in households, web-based instruction began to see more use. Learners could actually access a variety of materials at the click of a mouse. These web-based courses improved as years passed, including higher connection speeds, which helped make the experience more pleasant for the user. As technology improved, so did the actual course content specifics, including video and graphics. Blended learning and e-learning as a whole has seen rapid change in the past 2 decades, beginning in 1998 with the first generation of web-based instruction. Computers were no longer just for organizations and the wealthy few, but for the masses. More and more households began purchasing personal computers for their families to enjoy, while companies made PCs readily available for every employee. Then computers started to offer greater interactivity. Graphics, sound, and video became more immersive, while browsers increased connection speeds and gave virtually everyone access to internet learning resources. Rather than having to physically distribute a CD-ROM to learners, organizations could simply upload their material, e-learning assessments, and assignments via the web, and learners could access them with the click of a mouse button from the comfort of their home. At first, many CD-ROM developers tried to simply publish their e-learning courses to the internet without making any modifications. However, they quickly learned that their existing online content, such as large video files that took minutes to download, would need to be finely tuned to meet the needs of the web-based learners. As advances in technology occurred, including computers beginning to be more powerful, having bigger memory storage and artificial intelligence began to give hope that instruction can be tailored to the needs of each individual student, much like having a one-to-one tutor. Even as the decades passed, more people began to question if traditional methods of education were actually serving the best needs of the students. The term mostly used by advocates for this approach is personalized instruction. And Yeedy discussed the need for change in the way we educate our students. She argued that although the technology continued to advance, the teaching practices that went along with these technologies stagnated. But in more than 30 years since personal computer and computer assisted instruction entered K-12 education, not much has changed. Computers are now just a commonplace in the classroom, but teaching practices often look very similar, as do learning outcomes for students. And Yeedy argues that the way we have been teaching is not the only problem facing our schools. It is in need of a drastic transformation. Transforming classrooms aren't just dependent on adding technology. It needs more of a village approach to help transform instructional environments into the 21st century. Barber argues that the blended learning movement really began to take steam in 1991 with the first online private school opening. In 1994, the online movement moved to the public school sector and even began to receive funding from the federal government. Unfortunately, many of us who are involved in the field cannot say we have the same level of familiarity of the history, development, and current status of the K-12 online blended learning outside of the United States. The first estimate of student enrollment was back in 2000, in the 2001 school year, when Clark stated that there were between 40,000 and 50,000 K-12 students enrolled in at least one distance learning education course. Even back in its early forms, the drivers of blended learning continue to pretty much be the same as they are now, including a big focus of growing the student and teacher while raising awareness for what blended learning actually looks like in the classroom. In Carrie Rice's research study on the history and policies in K-12 online and blended learning programs, she states that with any online educational program, as the decades pass, the distance learning programs have experienced unprecedented growth since its inception at the turn of the 21st century. At the turn of the 21st century, just a few short years after more availability of the internet, we began to see policy recommendations targeting e-learning at the K-12 level, including distance education or online learning in an attempt to improve the way we educate our K-12 students. Blended learning, however, began to take shape. With all that came the definitions of what it actually meant to blend instruction. This meant a mix of both mainstream and virtual education. However, true blended learning models borrow many of the tenets that drive virtual schools, and so many of the challenges are also still the same. Even with a blended learning model, there are policies that have to be worked out just like in a brick and mortar school, such as the amount of seat time, flexible scheduling, grade-based assessments, grade level progressions, etc. These all impact the implementation of the innovative personalized approach to education in the U.S. A blended learning environment can help e-learning be effective and authentic for students while giving them choices in how they demonstrate their learning. When it comes to social change, Pappas defined a blended learning environment as an educational program that can be formal or non-formal, in which combines online digital media with traditional classroom methods. In 2015, it was predicted by Solway and Norris, authors and experts of the Journal, that blended learning is indeed the future of educational technology in the K-12 classroom. When it comes to diversity of learners, Saviri argues that blended learning is directly aligned to utilize diverse learning experiences to meet the changing needs of the 21st learner. Since school districts may potentially serve urban, suburban, and rural students, it must be argued that each of these students have had different experiences and levels of preparedness when it comes to entering each grade. With the learning community, as with any e-learning environment, it is important to make the learner feel like they are connected to others, as they might have times where they feel isolated, and that can actually deter the learning process. Blended learning gives the student the opportunity to build their learning community virtually and in person. When it comes to digital citizenship, digital literacy is defined by Ribble as the process of teaching and learning about technology and the actual use of technology. Digital citizenship is part of the digital literacy platform. With blended learning, the students are utilizing technology, but also learning about appropriate use, including etiquette, collaboration, communication, research skills to actually find accurate information while fostering communication among schools and parents to build a partnership to best meet the needs of the students. As an e-learning solution, preparing the 21st century student is very important as the blended learning e-learning format continues to be a game changer in meeting students' diverse needs and learning styles, including offering a wide variety of real-world authentic skills for students. Blended learning helps build communication, collaboration, problem solving, and creativity while allowing students to take responsibility in their learning while making decisions on how they choose to demonstrate skills. With students being prepared for success in school and life after, blended learning can help learners build and learn strategies for success in a very competitive world, whether they choose the path of college or career readiness. With multiple methods and interpretations of blended learning, sometimes it is difficult for people to get an actual understanding as to what it actually looks like in a learning environment. Just recently, our district sent out a district-wide survey to teachers and administrators to give us their thoughts on what blended learning looks like in action. To our dismay, we were bombarded with a variety of different interpretations and definitions of what it looked like. When sharing these results with our external blended learning consultant, they shared that this has been all too common over the K-12 school districts that she has visited, in which she supports over 40 of the 50 school districts in the United States. You don't have to look very far to find examples of success of blended learning in action. Here are just a few of them. In the Franklin Preparatory Academy, located in Columbus, Ohio, they have a school that uses a hybrid model. Students use the online courses to complete their high school credits off campus. Then they meet with teachers every 2 weeks in the school building, or teachers visit them in their homes to touch base. This approach seems to be helping the poverty-stricken population meet the community's needs for the student. The FPA is pleased with its success so far. Now, in its fourth year of implementation, the school has seen enrollment triple from 47 students when they first started to over 150. It will reach capacity when enrollment reaches to 200. Another example of success is located in Henrico County Public Schools in Virginia. Henrico 21 is an overarching concept that represents innovative approaches to teaching and learning throughout the district. Each year, Henrico County Public School hosts an annual showcase to promote, share, and encourage quality teaching practices. The Henrico County Public School District developed the Teaching and Learning Innovation Progressive Chart to help promote blended learning in all classrooms. The chart focuses on self-assessment of the teacher and the learner, which focuses on creativity, innovation, critical thinking, problem solving, research and information fluency, and communication and collaboration. In 2008, Henrico County Public Schools embarked on a 3-year study of their laptop initiative, and their findings showed that the students were engaged in more technology-based problem-solving, research, teamwork, and communication-based projects that reflected 21st century learning skills. In 2013, Henrico County Public Schools was honored as a district to watch by the International Society of Technology and Education. Shan and Glassed Ferry conducted research on how blended learning could be used to teach pre-service teachers to prepare them for the ever-changing student. All teachers, including pre-service educators, need to be prepared to teach in a variety of different environments. formats and platforms. Shan and Glassed Fairy stated that our newest educators need to be aware of the affordances and constraints of face-to-face, blended, and online environments. They also need to develop courses for each format according to the needs of their students, schools, and districts. If we prepare our newest teachers for the 21st century classroom, initiatives like blended learning have the potential to transform education in the K-12 environment. Blended learning promises student and teacher productivity gains by changing how face-to-face time is actually utilized. In 2017, Lama Dangwal conducted a research on blended learning in the hopes to gain more understanding on the innovative effect it could have on an actual learning environment. With the educational system at present is in a transition stage, a blended learning environment looks to help transform educational experiences while using an innovative approach for implementation. Lama contends that with blended learning, it needs rigorous implementation efforts, including having the right attitude, budget, and highly motivated teachers and students for successful implementation. Broderson and Mazzillo conducted a study in 2017 of a summary of a group of existing blended learning programs that offer differentiated learning options for students. In their data collection, they identified that out of the programs they looked at, 45% of the blended learning programs studied offered differentiation in the face of component of instruction. They also discovered statistically significant positive effects were found in some programs that they even investigated. With content courses not regularly being revised, books not being updated, and teachers not showing great interest in upgrading their skills, we seem to not be fully preparing our students for the modern professions of today and tomorrow. Online and blended learning programs can offer differentiated learning options, but we must try to adapt to learn how to do that. Blended learning looks to differentiate learning options while providing a variety of ways our students can engage with content and acquire new knowledge while having the potential to be aligned with student interest and academic skills. The future of blended learning will involve blended learning instructional models while offering content, resources, and data-driven teaching that occurs both digitally and face-to-face. More schools opt for a blended learning approach for student success. With the combination of online and face-to-face instruction, it is more effective than either method alone. Teachers and students' roles should change for effective learning experiences that allow for personalization of learning. Since technology continues to rapidly change, these factors allow for a blended learning approach that will give the students a creative way to access their content while providing them the opportunity to be a part of learning communities online and in person. Let's talk about what blended learning should actually look like. It should mean it's a 21st century learning environment that includes 24/7 access of learning opportunities, a mixture of face-to-face and online learning, student-centered, providing more choices in learning, and either BYOD, bring your own device, or devices provided by the actual school. In today's classroom, blended learning helps provide today's student the necessary 21st century skills to prepare them for an ever-changing society. The 21st century learning classroom helps provide more choices in learning while giving learners access for learning opportunities at their expense. With the mixture of face-to-face and online opportunities, this aligns with being student-centered and provides diverse learning experiences for all students. With an estimated 2/3 of school districts offering some form of blended learning, the movement is consistently growing and is even projected that over 50% of all K-12 courses that are currently being taught actually being offered online. Even more traditional classrooms are getting a makeover, so to speak, with the use of flexible seating and classroom work areas that are more conducive for collaboration and learning. The future of blended learning looks very bright as the mixture of online and face-to-face instruction continues to take many different forms in a variety of school districts across the globe. As all general education teachers aim for providing the best differentiated educational experience, special need teachers also strive to provide special education students with a constructive, enriched learning experience. The concept of a blended classroom has proven to be successful in achieving this goal. A blended learning environment provides special needs students with a twofold benefit, with a face-to-face physical teacher of whom to ask questions and to seek guidance with, in addition to the assets of virtual resources, including learning communities and web-based productivity tools. With an estimated 6 million students with special needs enrolled in public schools, the influx of students with special needs and learning disabilities has presented the educational community with a variety of different challenges that must be met. Rivera states that blended learning education is quickly rising as the fastest growing effective program to address the learning challenges of students with special needs. Rivera also argues that the main goal of blended instruction is to provide an avenue to teach the students cognitive independence, make educational good choices, make it useful through modern technology, and establish the sustainability of the classroom for the future. Her findings in her study research was that there were clear identifiable benefits of blended learning models for students with special needs. Wang, Quek, and Hugh discussed blended learning and how it could provide flexibility and convenience to students to have choices in attending a lesson in the classroom or participation online. Their research study supported the concept that blended synchronous learning has the capacity to provide a meaningful opportunity for students who weren't able to attend in-person classroom for a variety of different reasons. They are allowed to participate in instructional activities via a two-way video conferencing in real time. The authors also identified that blended learning as a convenient and flexible setting where students could participate in lessons from a distance from any device. Furthermore, it provided the online students equal learning experiences to studying in person or in the classroom. In a research study conducted by Margolis, Porter, and Pittery, they identified a number of instructional best practices when implementing blended learning, such as setting the stage, consistency when actual teaching, timeliness in posing materials, time on task, accountability for online activities, use of structured active learning, instructor use of feedback or student preparation, incorporation of student feedback into the course, short reviews on online material during class, and ensuring that technology is user-friendly. They concluded that instructors using a blended learning format should consider these best practices when incorporating their own course design and management. They stated a desire to conduct more research to see if the implementation of these practices affects student performance. In conclusion, my biggest advice to you is don't be afraid of change. Blended learning is the future of e-learning, and it helps build capacity of the 21st century learner. More support is needed for teachers to receive effective training in what a blended learning environment looks like in the classroom, and an understanding of their changing role from an actual lecturer to a facilitator of learning. With the misconception that the integration of various technologies constitutes a blended learning classroom alone, more education is needed to be shared with teachers, administrators, district leaders, and students to help debunk this myth. District leaders and administrators need to build buy-in with teachers, making the case for consensus with teachers and staff as to why a blended learning approach is beneficial to them and their students. With the influx of one-to-one devices in classrooms, we must change our instructional approaches as the actual classroom environment shifts to today's current needs with students. Teachers will embrace blended learning when they understand the benefits of building lifelong skills such as problem solving, communication, collaboration, creativity, and innovation. They also will embrace blended learning when they are given the appropriate training and support to make these changes in the classroom. This form of e-learning will not change overnight. Usually it takes between 5 to 7 years for effective change to be noticed. This form of e-learning is the best way to personalize instruction and use mastery-based learning to improve overall student outcomes through a blended learning approach of a face-to-face and online learning environment.